right, guys, Professor Davis here, and we are going to now dive into part 2 of the population and community as well as ecology notes. And in this particular set, we're going to focus mostly on behavior and animal behavior. Okay, so as we dive in, let's define behavior. Behavior is a response to an environmental stimulus. So as you're stimulated by something, how you act or behave is what we're going to be looking at here. Well, what is a stimulus? A stimulus is something that initiates a response in the form of the behavior. All right, so when you touch something hot, your behavior should be to withdraw or pull it away. We don't necessarily keep our hand on there and be like, is this still really hot? No, you pull it or withdraw away. And so that's going to be the behavior. The hot object is the stimulus. So when we look at behavior, they fall into one of two main categories we're going to look at. The first category is the innate behavior. Innate behavior is that behavior that's automatic. It's a behavior that's normally genetically programmed, and we do see that it is a more stereotypical type of behavior. A learned behavior is a behavior that is brought about due to your actual experiences. And so because of this, your learned behaviors can adapt and change. So a lot of times you already have like a pre-existing behavior, but you can adapt and change that behavior based on the learning that takes place. Now this brings us to the idea of nature versus nurture. And in reality, we are a combination of both. So nature is the genes, that's the innate, the ingrained part, and the nurture is the environment or the learned part. So we are a combination of both. Well, what is the purpose of having behaviors, and especially certain types of behaviors? Well, that is for survival. Okay, so survival is what we're looking at, and these behaviors should help us with that goal. Now, basic behaviors that are associated with survival are going to be those that help you in your environment, help you get resources like food, shelter, space, mates, water. Those are going to be behaviors for that. We also see that good survival behaviors are also going to help you avoid predators. This is going to help you be able to deal with internal conflicts of fight or flight that take place in your body. Do you fight for your position, or do you run away in what we call flight? So behaviors a lot of times are naturally selected, which we talked a little bit more about natural selection in a previous video. So some concepts we want to make sure that we're looking at here. Behaviors have a genetic basis. They are inherited, and they could be environmentally influenced. So they could change over time. Animals that have the best behaviors help them meet their basic needs, which in turn helps them survive. When they survive, they are naturally selected to then produce offspring. Once they produce offspring, we see that those traits are then passed on. This is the idea of survival of the fittest. The idea of being successful in nature is to survive and pass on your genes to the next generation. Now, fittest doesn't always mean the biggest and the best in that way. Okay, fittest may be measured in a number of offspring produced by the animal. The more fit the individual, the more offspring they will have. Animals with unproductive behaviors that are not considered good, typically will not survive, they will not reproduce, and because of that, they don't contribute their genes into the genetic pool. Okay, and so they don't get passed on. Some external factors that affect behaviors are going to be the need to acquire food. That's a big motivator and drive when we talk about behavior. Also, the idea of trying to find mates and to avoid predators. These are all motivators that are going to ultimately influence that organism's behavior. So behaviorists, or what we call ethologists, are going to attempt to determine a couple of things. One, how biologically does an animal carry out that behavior? How are they organized and equipped in order to perform that type of behavior? But then also, how is the behavior going to be beneficial to their survival? How does it help them in surviving that particular circumstance or environment? Okay, that is the goal of a behavioralist when they're studying the animal behavior. Now, when we've looked at this, we do see there are two body systems who contribute most to this influence. These are going to be the nervous system and the endocrine system. So if you'll recall from the body systems video, the nervous system produces quick responses, and they do this through electrical impulses or nerve impulses. On the other hand, the endocrine system is going to be a little slower, but it's going to use chemical messengers as hormones in order to respond. Now, these two are going to ultimately work together. So if an organism has both a developed nervous system and a developed endocrine system, their behaviors are going to be more complex. If they're lacking one of these systems, or these systems are more primitive, their behaviors are going to be more simplified. Okay? So the point here is that these guys are going to help promote internal readiness for a behavior such as like migration in birds or mating patterns in a lot of different organisms. So complexity of the behaviors varies, and it varies based on the level of the central nervous system and whether or not they have an endocrine system. Okay, so these two are going to be really important. So the first type of behavior that we want to look at are the innate behaviors. Innate behaviors are predominantly the gene-influenced ones. They're the ones you're born with. They're automatic. You don't really have to think about them at all. And they are the stereotypical responses to a stimuli. Now, if we're looking at these as being the ones you're born with, you don't need a lot of learning. You don't need to have a complex nervous system or endocrine system for these. Which is more adapted to respond in an innate behavior? Is it the vertebrates or the invertebrates? Well, if you said invertebrates, that is the correct answer. Why are invertebrates going to do more innate behaviors? Well, their nervous system is normally not as well developed as vertebrates are. All right, so they don't have that advanced nervous system. And they also have a limited ability to process external stimuli. They can only react in a particular way, like jellyfish. It doesn't matter if they run into you, a rock, or a predator, they're going to sting that because they cannot distinguish between the three because they don't have eyes or a brain to be able to process that information. Okay? And so because of this, they're going to rely on their innate behavior. Another reason too is they typically have a shorter lifespan and no maternal nurturing. And so there's not a lot of learning that's going to take place in these groups. Now, these behaviors, these quick, fast, gene-influenced behaviors do have an advantage. And the advantage is that you can perform these behaviors with no period of learning. You just do it. Okay? So in these particular cases, some of these behaviors are beneficial because you can just perform them correctly the first time. So the first time you make or do the behavior, you're already good at it. Okay, and that's what we look at for the innate behaviors. So I'm going to give you a few examples of innate behaviors. So the first ones are known as FAPs, which are fixed action patterns. These guys are initiated by a sign stimulus. So something triggers them to respond, okay? Once that FAP is initiated by that sign, they have to complete the whole task. Now, the reason they have to complete the whole task is because that behavior is stereotypical and it has to be completed. It's kind of like the animal has OCD. If they start it, they have to finish it. FAPs always happen in the same manner. They do them the exact same way. Modifications of an FAP could change with learning, but it's going to be very simplified learning. And I'm going to show you a picture of this in a minute when we get to the first idea of learning. This normally happens though as the organism just learns how to control their skills better, their motor skills better. And we do see this in some of your higher vertebrates like birds. That's the example I'm going to show you in a little bit. And so on here, guys, I do have a couple of examples. You can Google these or put them into YouTube and find these videos that I have linked here for my class. But here on YouTube, you can just put in like stickleback fish and you can get the video that this is referencing. Same thing with the goose and egg rolling. The stickleback fish is similar to what you see here in this picture. The male stickleback is going to have a red belly. So anytime it sees the sign stimulus of a red belly, it's going to attack it. All right, so it attacks the red belly. It doesn't matter what it is. And it'll attack it the same way, whether it's a actual other male stickleback or if it's a bobber that you use for fishing. It will attack it if the belly of it is red. On the other hand, if the organism is a female or resembles the female by having a swollen belly, the male stickleback will then court that object or that fish, all right, because that is the sign for them to know that that is the opposite sex. On the egg rolling example, what they do is they take the egg out of the nest and they put it in front of the goose. The goose sees it and it goes using its beak and neck to roll the egg back into its nest. But in the video, the scientists take the egg and move it back out, and the goose has to get all the way back to the nest before it notices the egg has been removed, and it then does it again. All right? And so this is the goose egg rolling example. The next one we want to look at is the reflex. A reflex is a rapid involuntary response to a stimuli. And guys, this remains through your whole lifetime. We check your reflexes when you go to the doctor all the time because they should be intact. If they are not, you have some sort of brain damage or spinal cord damage, and that needs to be looked at. So the nervous system is key here. It's going to use the sensory receptors that are going to collect the stimulus and the data. They're going to send the message up the sensory nerves to your central nervous system. Now, central nervous system means they have to have a spinal cord or a brain. This causes the motor neurons to be triggered, and you actually have a movement that takes place. So the input is the stimulus, and the output is how you respond to it. Now, there's a lot of reflexes that we have in our bodies. We have blinking, hiccuping, sneezing. You also have muscle reflexes. One of the most well-known is the knee jerk reflex, the one where you sit there and they use the little hammer and hit below your knee on your patella tendon and your leg kicks out. That's an example there of a reflex. Now, guys, these reflexes, like I said, they should stay throughout your life. Now, instinct is similar to reflexes, but they're more valuable in actually helping survive the area. And so an example of this is the instinct of lovebirds to build a nest in a particular way. This nest allows them to build it the way that they're supposed to with different types of twigs and different materials in order to use that. And they didn't have to be taught how to do this. The lovebirds just, they have instincts that allow this to occur. Now, again, I do have a few videos that kind of go into this. There's the fainting goats and the freezing frog. So again, you can put these into the search bar on YouTube and you can potentially watch them. And so these are a reflex or an instinct that takes place. Some of these are more beneficial for survival, like the freezing frog, but fainting goats, not so much. So take a look. The next one is orientation and taxis. This is a type of behavior that allows the organism to respond towards a stimulus or away from the stimulus. And so the stimulus here in the first example is phototaxic, which is light. So light is going to either draw the organism towards it or it's going to drive the organism away. So an example is the moth. The moth has a positive phototaxis. It's drawn towards the light. This is why when you turn your porch light on, moths will be drawn towards that light. On the other hand, roaches or cockroaches are not. When you turn the light on, they scurry and hide. They get away from the light. So they have a negative response to phototaxis. Another one is chemotaxis. This is going to use chemicals or pheromones. They're going to use these chemicals to attract mates in a positive way. But we also see that they could mark their territories in keeping other individuals away as a negative form of marking. A good example of chemotaxis is ants. If you see how ants follow their particular trail towards a food source or back towards their actual their ant mound, we do see that they are going to use chemicals to do this. If you disrupt those chemicals, they are not able to find their way. Another way is with the sun and stars. This is what birds use in order to navigate when they migrate from, say, like South America up to Canada or vice versa. We do see they use the suns and stars for navigation, which that's exactly what we used to do prior to the instrumentation that we have now. All right, this brings us to the learned behaviors. Learned behaviors are those that are going to be modified due to life experiences. So as you go through life, you will modify a lot of these behaviors. So vertebrates dominate these learned behaviors. These pre-programmed behaviors become modified due to experience. Example, and the reason why this happens is due to the fact that we have a longer lifespan, which allows for more time to actually learn a process. Periods of maternal nurturing also are going to occur, which allows the learning to take place, right? So learning is going to take place in the younger ages of this. So I told you I would come back to an FAP. The FAPs, remember, are the fixed action patterns, but this one's a modified one. This is one that gets better as they learn how it works. So the chick pecking the parent's bill is the FAP. When they see the parent's bill or beak in the area, they're going to peck at it, which then allows them to be fed, okay? They're going to get better at doing this the longer they're alive. So you'll notice in the picture for number 2, their pecking accuracy when they're first born is not very good. They only hit the beak 3 times. But if you look at day 2, they've already learned how to be more accurate and to hit the beak almost 100% of the time. And so that's going to get them more food that they're going to be fed. Okay, so this is a modified fixed action pattern. So the next one is imprinting and song learning. Imprinting is going to be where they learn in a very sensitive time period. If they do not learn this in that time period, they will not learn it. Okay? We do see that humans have some of this when it comes to the idea of talking, not learning words, because we can learn words our whole life. But the idea of talking and communicating in complete sentences has to be done by a certain time period. Otherwise, they can't do it. All right. We're not able to put those sentences together properly. And a sensitive time period that we're going to look at here is going to be the idea of imprinting for knowing who their parent is for recognition. Also, how do they figure out a desirable mate? So these are associated with this idea that familial imprinting is where the offspring is going to be able to recognize its parent. And this was studied by Lorentz. Lorentz did this with little goslings, like you can see here in the picture. And once they imprint on who their mom is, that's who they follow in this particular manner. So what Lorentz would do is Lorentz would take the mom away, and then he would be their mother. And they would do the same behaviors with him as they would do with their natural mom. Sexual imprinting is where the young learn to recognize characteristics of a desirable mate. They're taught what is good versus what is bad. We see that they also then may learn any mating rituals that the group may need to perform. This leads us also then to song learning. Songbirds develop a species-specific song from the older adults. They listen and they mimic what they hear. This also occurs during that sensitive period, and if they don't learn it in that period, they will not learn their song. The next one we want to look at is the associative learning. Associative learning is a change in behavior that involves connections between 2 events. So we associate one thing with another thing. This is an extension of behavior that may occur, unlike imprinting, where learned behaviors is sustained, we do see that this might change a behavior or get rid of a behavior if it's not being done after a while. So classical conditioning is one of the main ways that this occurs, and this is associated with the scientist Pavlov. If you've taken psychology, you've probably heard of Pavlov and Skinner, which we're going to talk about here. But Pavlov is the one who did classical conditioning. He looked at the fact that an individual can be conditioned to respond to an irrelevant stimuli. So what did he do? Well, he got some dogs and he rang a bell, and then he fed the dog. And then he rang the bell and he fed the dog. And so the dog started salivating anytime it heard a bell ring because it associated being fed with the bell. The bell was irrelevant. It didn't have to be present, but they started to make that connection. We see that advertising does this all the time. Advertising uses sex appeal to sell products. When that doesn't even matter to the actual product, they'll use it to try to get you to buy it. Okay, so it's using the same kind of tactic. Now, again, I do have a couple of examples. These come from the actual TV shows. One is The Office, where Jim is going to use classical conditioning on Dwight when it comes to computer sounds and Altoids, like a mint. How I Met Your Mother also had an episode about a certain restaurant and how he was being conditioned for it. So these are just some examples that you guys can take a look at if you would like. Like I said, the links are not available through here, but you can put them into saying Office classical conditioning and things will come up. On the operant conditioning, this one is associated with the individual or scientist named Skinner. This is where a stimulus response is connected and is strengthened, typically via rewards like food. And we do this a lot of times for training, like teaching animals tricks. When they perform the trick correctly, they get a treat. Okay, so then they start associating, if I do this, I get a treat. If I listen to this, I get a treat. So it gives a trial and error type of learning to take place. So this one is going to be where you could have negative reinforcement, or you could also have positive reinforcement. We use both. Some are more efficient for individuals than others. And so again, I do have some examples here from the Big Bang Theory. All of these actually come from the Big Bang Theory. We do see that this is going to be where Sheldon tries to change Penny's personality a little bit because he's annoyed by her, and so he rewards her with chocolate. But on the other hand, he gets annoyed with Leonard, so he sprays him with a spray bottle, trying to get him to stop that behavior. They also do one where if they get off topic, they try to punish each other by pulling tape off of their arms. This is going to be seen with the whole idea of negative reinforcement versus positive punishment. And so you can take a look there. Again, Googling it, and these guys are related to the Big Bang Theory. Last but not least, the behavior we want to look at is habituation. Habituation is a loss of response to a stimuli. This is the cry woof effect. It's a decrease in the response to repeated occurrences of a stimuli. So if you'll recall the story of the boy who cried woof, he ran into town, said there was a woof. They all came out to help him, and there was no woof. And then he did it again, and he did it again, and each time there was no woof. And so again, the people then stopped listening to him. And when he ran in when there was actually a woof, nobody there was to help him, and he got eaten by the wolf. So in nature, though, this enables animals to disregard unimportant stimuli. So an example is when birds are in a nest and leaves fall in around them. Those leaves are not there to hurt them, and they shouldn't get scared of them. And so falling leaves are eventually not going to trigger a fear response in the baby birds. Now, this does take time, but eventually they will get habituated to it. A lot of times you get habituated to your name, where maybe you don't listen, especially like if you're a mom and the kids go, mom, 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 mom. You don't listen necessarily as much anymore. But if they call you by your first name, then you would listen. My husband does this all the time, where I call him babe most of the time. But if he doesn't listen to me after I've called him babe a few times, I will call him by his first name, and I'll say, hey, Brian. Then he's like, why are you calling me Brian? Well, it's because you weren't listening to the name that I had before, because you've been habituated to it. All right. And this is the same thing that happens in nature. All right, so if you have any questions about part 2, please let me know.